The 1992 Los Angeles uprising, the Cambodian genocide, Japanese American incarceration. What you know isn't always the full story. Our new podcast, Inheriting, about Asian American and Pacific Islander families where the past is personal.
Korean Americans, we call it 사이구.
Did you ever realize when you were a child that you became an orphan?
Camp was such a hard time. How do you think you got through it?
Listen to Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR network, wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And welcome to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And we are here today with an author chat with Preeti Chhibber about her debut YA novel, Payal Mehta's Romance Revenge Plot. As always, Books and Boba is supported in part by our listeners. So if you'd like to become a bigger part of our podcast, head on over to patreon.com/booksandboba, where you can join our book club and gain access to our members-only Discord server, as well as monthly bonus podcasts.
Yeah, I feel like Preeti is someone that I have seen floating online for a very long time. We run in similar circles, nerdy culture and also book culture. She is a contributor to Book Riot, the Nerds of Color, and the Mary Sue. So we do go into that a little bit at the beginning of our conversation on like geeky pop culture writing for that kind of subject, and then we go into racial microaggressions and being an Asian in the South, and a lot of fun topics.
Yeah, I mean, as you may tell, the title of her book it tells exactly what it is, and it's a good fun chat about a good fun time. So please enjoy our conversation with Preeti.
And we are here with Preeti Chhibber. She has written for Polygon, Elle, Book Riot, The Nerds of Color, Mary Sue, and many other. She has also written for IPs, including Spider-Man, Avengers, and Star Wars. And we're here to talk about her debut young adult romantic comedy, Payal Mehta's Romance Revenge Plot, which is coming out later this week. Welcome to the show, Preeti.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. You're such a cool person. I see you on the internet all the time. And as a fellow geek girly, it's like such an honor. And I wanted to start this conversation with a little fun icebreaker. So in your book, you have a character who is really in love with rom-coms from like the 2000s. It's a character that you don't expect to love 2000 rom-com, which we can bring up later. But what is your favorite 2000s rom-com?
Oh my gosh.
I know there's so many.
It's sort of three-way tie with one that isn't technically 2000s. It's 99, but Can't Hardly Wait, 10 Things I Hate About You, and She's All That.
Oh,
They're
yeah,
so
She's
good.
All That. Yeah. I guess like I'll share mine. 13 going on 30, and
Yes.
And Penelope. I don't know if you guys have heard of that one.
Like the Christina Ricci movie?
Yeah, with James McAvoy. I think that was the start of my James McAvoy journey. Imagine like my surprise when I found out that he was Mr. Tumnus in Narnia.
Yeah, I don't know if I didn't have a rom-com phase in the early 2000s because I was in high school then. I was really into Road Trip and Euro Trip, which
Fair.
are like peripheral rom-coms, let's say, from the guys. I think my favorite movie is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, but that's not
That is
typically
not
a
a
rom-com.
rom-com.
Either.
That is
No.
like depressing as hell.
I picked teen rom-coms, but I think actually if I'm going early 2000s, it's got to be like 2 weeks notice. Like
yes.
Sandra Bullock, queen of rom-coms.
Yeah. And it's just, I felt so ancient, by the way, when your character was just like,
I know.
These are rom-coms that my mom loves to watch, and he pulls out DVDs, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like DVDs. Do these kids even know how to use a DVD player? Have they ever seen one?
You're like physical media.
I saw a really depressing TikTok the other day, and it was a nanny explaining to a toddler, oh, before the actual movie begins, we have to watch the previews, because they were watching something on DVD and they had like upcoming home releases or whatever. And she didn't skip through those because I guess like for some of them you can't skip through, but she was also trying to teach him a lesson on like patience. And I was like, oh my God, these kids are so used to just, fast forwarding or just like skipping the intro. Like,
yeah, right.
Like
Wait
even
5 seconds,
like
skip the
that.
ad, go right to the video.
They don't know what commercials are unless like their parents are not, premium subscribers to whatever streaming platforms are out there. Yeah. I felt so ancient reading that part in your book, but
yeah, we'll get to that because I have lots of questions about that as well.
Yeah,
but,
we'll get to that, but I just listed out your credentials. Curious, when did the writing bug bite you? And when did you realize that writing was an actual career you could pursue?
I think I probably had a similar experience to many of my fellow Asian Americans, which is that I didn't know for a very long time that writing was a career or books were a career. I was pre-med in undergrad, not good at it, like just absolutely terrible. And I'd always loved reading, and I wrote like fanfic when I was in high school. But it wasn't until my older brother, who is an actor, so also off the beaten path.
Oh, wow.
For
I feel
my
like
parents.
That's worse for a lot of immigrant parents out there.
But he was in New York studying, and he met somebody who worked in publishing. And he was like, well, my sister loves to read. Would you have a conversation with her? And that's when I sort of learned that like editing was a job and like making books was a job. And I was like, I didn't even know this world existed. And so writing actually happened after I'd been in publishing for a long time, because I also was like, well, if I'm in publishing, I can't be a writer. But that is extremely untrue. And a fellow author friend of mine, Ellen O, reached out to me in 2016-ish, to ask if I wanted to contribute a short story to an anthology she was creating of stories inspired by Asian mythology. And at the time, I had been like writing on the side in terms of a journalistic and pop culture perspective. But I was like, yes, this sounds amazing. I want to try it. I've written fiction when I was younger, and I write nonfiction and pop culture stuff now. So why not just try this out? And that's sort of where it started.
I have to say, as someone who, used to write online for like entertainment and stuff, like even if you enjoy the pop culture, it is still work. And
yes.
I don't think a lot of people understand that just because you get like previews for like shows. Like, I mean, you have to, like, it's great watching them, but also you have to take notes and actually review those shows. Do you think like your background in like online journalism helped you with deadlines, like keeping to them as like an author?
I think deadlines are, I do need them, because otherwise a project will never be finished if I don't have a deadline. I'll just keep editing it. But I learned really bad habits when I was in high school that I still have not broken to this day, of like, I know exactly how much time it will take me to finish something. And so I procrastinate real bad, which means deadline weeks are like extremely long writing days. And so for, pop culture writing and sort of online pop culture writing, those deadlines are very, very tight. So they did help sort of build the skill set of having to write fast and like be on top of editing as you're writing and like trying to get to like final sentences much faster. But it's deadlines. What's that Douglas Adams quote? Like, I love the sound of deadlines as they go whooshing by. Whooshing past my head. Yeah. Every editor's worst nightmare, I think. An author who does not
keep to their deadlines. I mean, I feel for George R.R. Martin's editor. Like,
I could,
how much?
I
how
feel
much
like
pain?
I have so much anxiety about disappointing like editors or my agent. Like there's this like authority figure problem, which I'm sure again like people can relate to, where you're like, I just don't want you to be disappointed in me, so I'm gonna like break my life to get this in.
I wonder if that's like a person of color thing or like a daughter of immigrants.
Eldest daughter. It's the eldest daughter of immigrant thing. Very easily.
It's probably
could be.
all of the above, really. Like the dream is to get to the point where it's like, yeah, you wait for when I'm done, because I am that big of a deal. But I don't know if I'll ever get to that point either. I love that you mentioned that you cut your teeth doing fanfic, because that's actually a pretty common story with a lot of authors that we talk to. So I'm always curious, what was your area of fanfic? Like, what was your genre of choice, your
what
IP
was
of choice?
Yeah.
It started when I was like, because I was in the late 90s / early 2000s was when I was coming of age, and that was the boy band era. And so it was definitely Backstreet Boys, like at the top.
Amazing.
That then, thank God, GeoCities got bought and like deleted, because it's like maybe you can find it on the Wayback Machine, but it would be impossible. And then it went to like Naruto very quickly.
Nice. Yeah, I remember when Zanga was saying, "Hey, we're about to get rid of our servers. You want to download your old posts?" I'm like, no, I don't.
No, I'm good, thank you.
So like, I mean, that's interesting that you started with fan fiction, because you're writing for IP now, and that's pretty much fan fiction, but you get paid for it. Like, how was that, like, transitioning from like editing to writing actual books? And like, is your process different when you're writing IP and writing for like an original universe?
Yeah, I mean, I think IP, a lesson I had to learn very quickly, which you don't have to learn. I mean, fanfic, I think anyone who wants to be a writer, fanfic is an amazing space to sort of hone your craft, because you can take chances there. You don't have to worry about some of the other aspects of writing. IP, the difference between fanfic writing and IP, I think, is the number of people involved. So I did a book called, for the Spider-Man Far From Home movie, called Peter and Ned's Ultimate Travel Journal. And it was my first real foray into IP writing. And I wrote this whole book, and I had this thing that went throughout it of Peter telling jokes. And there were bad jokes on purpose, because he's Spider-Man. And I got this note back from the studio that was like, Peter doesn't do that. And it was this like very rude awakening of like, oh, right, that's my Peter Parker. That's like my version of Peter Parker. Is that person. He is that like comics wisecracking Peter, but MCU Peter is a different Spider-Man. And so with IP writing, you have to be able to kind of take a step back from your own iteration of that character and understand that it can't just be your iteration, that you have all these other, like you are literally playing in someone else's sandbox. So there are rules you have to abide by. Like when I did Spider-Man Social Dilemma, one of the earlier drafts, I had this like big fight that happened with like the Sinister Six, and like all these other Marvel heroes showed up, and these like Marvel people were like, no, no, you can't do that.
I mean, that's kind of a bummer, because, like fiction writing is about like creativity, but
there's still creativity in there, right? Like there are rules in fiction, like fictional universes as well. There are understandings, and you can break those rules, obviously, but there are, with romance, happily ever after, right? It doesn't necessarily end up in the romance genre if you don't have your happily ever after. There are certain conventions that you subscribe to within genre. There's a reason like a book is science fiction and not fantasy. So IP, that creativity still exists. Like I couldn't maybe include Captain America in my Spider-Man book, but it put me in the position of creating a new villain that I really liked and who didn't exist in the comics before. And so everything is push and pull when you're writing when you are writing professionally with and traditionally distributing your stuff. You have stakeholders involved. Even with your own, like my own book with Bile, there were conversations involved with my editor. If my intent was not getting across. And sometimes I'm like, but I think it is, but like maybe it wasn't. And right. One of my earlier short stories, there was a battle I lost with a copy editor, and I've held on to it in my heart for so long, where I had a character hissing a line, and the copy editor was like, there are no words with S's in this sentence. They cannot hiss this line. And I was like, you're being pedantic. But I lost that battle. I had to change it.
That's amazing that they could like pick stuff up like that. Like
copy editors are incredible.
Yeah, they're like mutants. But you brought up Pael, and I wanted to kind of transition into your debut young adult romantic comedy. So can you give us a short elevator pitch for those who have not heard about your book?
I'm so bad at these. The jokey elevator pitch when I was actually trying to sell it that I used was like, it's a romantic comedy through the lens of microaggressions. So the premise is you have Pael Mehta, who is in high school, and she's had a crush on this like hot white guy her entire high school career. Through a very madcap series of events, he ends up taking her to lunch. And she thinks that this is like the beginning of their love story, and it's going really well, and they're laughing and they're having a good time. And then he's like, you should meet my Indian friend. And she's like, what? And she decides that like it's unacceptable that someone thinks they can make a choice for her like that. And she ropes in her high school nemesis, Philip Kim, to help her like fix racism with love, which is absurd. And he is like, I'm only doing this for like this thing you're giving me. And obviously it becomes an enemies to lovers as over the course of the book.
I love that your title just tells us exactly what your book is about. I always wonder with these titles, like, was this just a placeholder that just stayed, or was this always going to be the title of your book?
It was funny. Originally, the book was called Beasts of Bile, is how I called it, because I love a pun. I'm obsessed with a pun. The problem is people didn't know how to pronounce bile, and so they were like, I don't get it. It wasn't hitting. And so we had to come up with something better. And so this was like one of the titles that when we were talking about what we could call it with my editor, there was like a whole list, and we all sort of landed on this one.
I mean, it's not as long as some of those like Japanese light novel titles that are like a billion words long, but you definitely know what you're getting into when you pick up this book.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of like John Tucker Must Die, like that kind of
yes,
like fun kooky title. You definitely get the vibe just from the title alone. So you mentioned racial microaggressions, and a major theme in your book is like navigating that. Like, should we compartmentalize our identity to make ourselves like more palatable to others? When do we pick our battles? When should we speak up or let things slide? What compelled you to explore these questions in a YA book?
I think it's really important for kids to be able to have imperfect conversations. Like when I was a kid, I was in high school when 9/11 happened, and that created this like storm of racism and anxiety that a lot of, I think, brown kids didn't know how to navigate because it was something where like you didn't have any control. Like I remember my parents being like, you can't go out tonight, or like my brother almost got, beat up in a bar, and there were all these awful things happening. And the way a lot of my friends and I reacted was to try to make fun of it, because that made it feel less painful and made it feel like we still had some control and still had some ownership. And so I really wanted to tackle this sort of like anxiety point of being told who you are from the outside in an awkward, like uncomfortable way, because that's how you learn. Like you don't sort of all of a sudden know how to speak about race and know how to like wrap your head around these things magically. You have to go through the process of learning it, and that involves imperfect conversations. And again, taking some of the, like, using humor to take some of the teeth away, which Pael has to learn, like, not everything can be a joke, and you can't only rely on humor, but it is a tool in your toolbox to be able to survive it.
Yeah, some of the microaggressions Pael like faces in this book, I'm like, I don't know how I would have responded as like a teenager. We definitely do not have a handbook for handling things like that. Do you have like a memory of like an awkward microaggression you've experienced as like a teen, and now you're just like, I wish I responded to that better? Like,
literally, when I was a senior, I was standing with my friend who is Sri Lankan, and these kids, we were supposed to like go somewhere after school with some kids, and they were like, one of the kids I didn't know well, who was like sitting in the backseat, I will never forget, he was like, you can't get in unless you tell us where Osama bin Laden is. And we were like, what? And I think at the time we were both so thrown, we just sort of like laughed it off awkwardly because we didn't know what to do. And it was so like aggressive and abrasive. And so I think of moments like that. And actually, I had a moment like Bile. Like, this was all because this book started out of spite. Because when I was in college, this guy did this to me. I like hung out with him at a party, and we hung out for like 2 hours, and it was awesome, and it was a good time. And then at the end of the night, he's like, "You gotta let me give your number to my Indian roommate." And I was like, "What?" So like,
yeah,
that's
even
how
as
I
an
dealt
adult,
with it.
I'm just like, how do you respond? Like,
I was like, "No, I'm okay, thank you." It was like very
nodding.
awkward.
Yeah. That's how I would respond in high school. Like,
Right? You're like, I didn't. If he had been here, I might have met him. But like, no, man, what?
yeah, I mean, if he's just being a wingman, he's right there. Hey, meet my friend. See if it works out. But it's like, who'd be great for you? Another person, like just like you. That's
Like,
weird.
why did you hang out with me all night? What's going on?
So you set your high school rom-com in South Florida, right? Centered around like people of color in a South Florida high school. And I know that you're a proud Southern Asian. You've been on Keith Chow's Southern Fried Asian podcast. You grew up in West Virginia and South Florida. So I guess was it really important for you to like make this a setting of your book? And were there any like nuances in growing up in this type of community that you really wanted to capture in your book?
One of the things that was really important to me to capture was the South Asian community, and how you can still experience and have these like uncomfortable ideas when you like your culture and when you like your community, because that was something I definitely like. I did Diwali functions every year. Like I joined all of the like Indian communities when I went to college. And having to confront like both sides of like the joy you feel with the thing and the anxiety and the frustration you feel with the thing. And it, for me, like, I don't necessarily know the experience of an Indian American person growing up in like Pennsylvania because I didn't do it, but I can speak to the experience of that person in South Florida. And so that's why I wanted to bring that in. I wanted to show, because I think sometimes we have an expectation that a book is going to be just about pain when you're speaking from like a hyphenate identity. And I wanted to show that it's not always pain, and the setting and community there sort of influenced that.
And, you can be a hyphenate, you can be an Asian American, still be ultra cringe. Like,
yeah.
how was it writing, like, to be in the head of like a cringy teenager? Like, do you need to take breaks while you're writing her unhinged thoughts sometimes? Like, how was that?
It's funny. I think the hardest part with Bile was like writing the points where she was lying to herself, because the book is in first person. So you have to watch her convince herself that it is okay that she is feeling small because it'll be worth it in the end. And it was so, because I was like, Bile, what are you doing?
yeah, don't let a boy ruin Taco Bell for you.
I know. So like that was really hard of like, because I think, so I always think of like when people are like, oh, why don't they just talk to the parents? And I think about like when I was a kid, and I was like, I never, ever would have done that.
No, that would be no help. They'd be like, what? Boys? What?
No, you're grounded. Like, you're never leaving the house again.
Like going back to the setting, I just have to say, like, your descriptions of like the humidity and just like what it's like to be a South Florida teen, like I thought that was like so specific to a point where I was like, wow, like this, like she has to be from South Florida, because there's no other way she would like get these little details. As someone who grew up in Georgia, I was like, yeah, the humidity is an experience. I just wanted to bring that up. I just felt validated as a Southern Asian reading your book.
I'm glad to hear that, because it definitely was like, I'm a vibes writer sometimes. Like if I could write a book that was just dialogue, I would do it. And so my editor was like, you need to include more setting. Like you need to make me feel like I'm in Florida. And I was like, okay, I can do that. What were the things that I was most frustrated by living in Florida? And it was like, it rains every day. Like this is not the Sunshine State. That is nonsense. Beaches, like things like that. So it was fun to like sort of think about the actualities of living there again.
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard that this book was set in Florida, I was like, oh no, not the state that is banning all these books and has had like very controversial takes on people of color. But surprisingly, I was like, this is a very funny book. And no one is like straight up like I don't know, like red hat, like MAGA supporter, like, oh my God, like get out of my country.
We had a conversation about it, but one book can't be everything, and you can't, it would be a disservice to try to include everything in a single title. And so we tried to acknowledge the reality. There are moments with Neil, her best friend, who is gay and Indian and sort of has his own story going on in tandem with Bile having hers. But there has to be a specificity to story. And I started writing this book in like 2018. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, like I started this book a long time ago because it does handle such heavy topics with humor. And that's like a difficult line to walk. But it's like acknowledging that pain. And there are moments where like Bile also, like part of the book is like there is a validity to the pain that comes from what we call microaggressions. Like just because it's not overt angry racism doesn't mean that it's okay or that you should wash it off and just like let it be. So it was like a conversation, but I couldn't do both and have the book be what the book is.
And I feel like, especially since you're dealing with kids, like kids aren't like, I feel like the types of microaggressions you include in your book are much more real to like what kids would be talking to each other, right? Especially kids who like don't know any different, don't know any better.
It's a specific type of microaggression for the community that I am representing in the social status that these characters have, I think. Because there is like, you can find yourself in a little bit of a bubble when you're like, all my best friends are Indian. And like, I have these like Indian or like communities that my parents are part of. And this is sort of how our life works. Like you go to these functions and you go to this auntie's house or like whatever it is. Like even when I was little in West Virginia, we had a really big Indian community because like my dad and my parents immigrated, and then my dad's med school friends immigrated, and then my mom's cousins immigrated. And so we had this like really big Indian community, which isn't to say you don't have friends outside of that community, but it does sort of dictate a lot of what your life looks like and the people that you're around and the safety that you feel in that community.
I am curious, like, how did you go about developing Bile's, Neil, and Divya's friendship dynamic? And did you decide from like the get-go that this trio was going to be all Indian American? And like, why was that important to you?
Because again, I wanted to show like what a community can look like, which isn't where it's isolating, but there are commonalities. And so I would also get irritated because so often you would see when it was a character where it was like a biracial couple, it would be person of color and white person. Like that was sort of the like MO for a very long time in YA fiction, at least. And you would have like the very special character of color who existed. And I wanted to show that it's not necessarily like that. You'll have friend groups who look like this, which is, again, it's not that they just look like that. Like Bile has other friends. These are just her two best friends because they have this long history together and this like community commonality.
Yeah. And also like, you know, you don't have to really code switch with them.
Right.
Because they know where you're from. And that's Like when I look back at the friends from like high school who I still talk to, I mean, like I've been very lucky. All of my really close high school friends have moved to California, so like we see each other pretty often. But they're all Asian, and it's like, oh, like my friend group was pretty diverse in high school, but it's just very strange that like the people that I didn't really have to code switch with and shared like this very we all had very different immigrant experiences and, you know, diaspora experiences, but it's like, okay, we get it. And I thought that was like really cool that you reflected that with Biles and her friends. This is going to be like so random, but I love Biles and Philip's like banter through Google Docs. And I was like, Google Docs? I mean, they still text and stuff and do video calls, but like primarily their conversation is through Google Doc. Where did you get this idea of using Google Doc as like their love language?
I love mixed media in books. I think it's so fun when people can find ways to use the various ways we communicate within books. Like when this must have been like 2008 or 2009, I was at Book Expo America, and Jennifer Egan was there just before A Visit from the Goon Squad came out, and she presented at this like panel. She presented the chapter of what A Visit from the Goon Squad is, a book that is sort of told in vignettes. It's told in short stories. They're all like, it's related. But one of the short stories is entirely in PowerPoint. And so she presented that PowerPoint short story chapter. And it is to this day one of the coolest things I've ever seen and one of the best books I've ever read. And it sort of shifted my thinking in how we can tell stories. So I love using other versions of other options for communication in books. And so having Philip and Bile communicate through a shared document where they're trying to plan this horrible plan that will not work out was just really fun, because I think about how like my friends and I used to use Google Docs when we had to like create a blog post or whatever. And it's just us typing to each other in this Word document.
Yeah. I mean, I want to touch more on the relationship with Philip, because I did love that, you know, it was one of the central relationships. It revolves around, you know, an academic rivalry, right? They're academic nemesis or nemesi or whatever. And I found it funny that both of their parents seem pretty chill about the academics. So it's all just like it's an internalized self-perpetuated rivalry. Can you talk about how you developed this rivalry between Philip and Bile?
I love enemies to lovers. It's my favorite trope. And I love banter. And so with Philip and Bile, I was like, what would be the most irritating thing if you're this kind of person? Like, you're like, Philip's whole thing is he likes being smart. He likes being like, he likes getting the A. He likes to be seen as smart.
He likes looking cool, too.
He likes looking cool. He's a little too cool for school with his bomber jacket. And Bile has her things that she's passionate about, and she wants to be the best in the thing that she's passionate about. And so they sort of have come to a head over their many years of like rivalry in high school and in the psychology project. And it just is so ripe for that. Like, I like respect you, but I don't want to tell you I respect you. But also you like drive me bananas because I like you, but I'm never going to admit that I like you. Like, all of that is just so fun to me and so ready for like, I like Bile is that character. I think the strongest connection between me and Bile is that we're going to go for the joke, like when there's a joke available. And so the banter was very much that, where I was like, I want them to have this heightened like irritation and chemistry together where they're, and it has to be clear that they both are interested in the other, but they're not going to admit it to themselves.
Yeah. I mean, for someone you hate so much, you do notice the cheekbones a lot, Bile.
Right? And like, why does Philip know what her schedule is?
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense that they do their banter on Google Docs because they're nerds.
They're nerds.
I love how they're just nerds and they're super petty and they have this history of sabotaging each other, but not really, because the way that they sabotage is so minute. And it's like, it's not a big deal. You guys should just chill. But I guess like when you're like when you're in high school, everything is heightened. So it's
Yes.
just like, I love this rivalry. It's just super funny.
It's also great that even though they're like he's helping her out with her really dumb plan on how to get back at this boy by making him fall in love with her, he takes it very seriously. Like they both take
Yes.
this like dumb plan super seriously. I thought that was really fun to read.
The stakes are so high.
I love how he's like, yeah, but what's like our tangible goal? And like comes up with an outline, and I'm like, dang, this is a science project. Like the most, like this is the nerdiest way to go about, getting someone to like you.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of getting someone to like you, how did you come up with the character of John? Because he could have easily been like a very like unlikable white dude who like doesn't know any better. And he is, but also like I find him a little bit endearing because he has all these like nerdy, geeky interests, but it seems like he doesn't really have anyone to share that with. And until he meets Pael and it's like, oh my God, you like all these like books and shows and music that I like. And I'm like, I thought I was not supposed to like this kid, but he's actually like kind of sweet in a very dumb way. So
He's trapped in his own little bubble of like toxic masculinity, right?
He has. I think the thing with John is, one, we have to understand why Pael likes him. So you can't have this like cartoonishly racist villain character. You have someone who's just like misguided and says hurtful things. But I'll never forget, I was talking to, when I was initially talking about this book and like thinking about literary agents, and I was talking to an agent about it. I walked through the whole story with them, and at the end they were like, well, what happens with John? And I was like, nothing. He's not the point of the book. It's not anyone's job to like teach him or fix him, because in real life, we're not there to be teachers for everybody who has hurt us, right? Like it's not necessarily on us to teach people all of these things about why they're consistently like hurting, like cutting at us with these microaggressions. And so it's never to say that John's like a bad person or an awful thing. He just was like, he's just this like cookie cutter kid who I think a lot of us grew up and were like, I have a crush on that person. He's really hot and like he's very like fun to be around, and then might say something that you're like, oh, I don't like how that made me feel, but I still want to be around this person, but I don't want to ruffle too many feathers. Because she does, the moments where she tries to push and say something, he sort of like pulls back and makes her feel a little bad for doing it. You know, so this isn't even necessarily someone who is in a position to be open to learning. And so that's sort of where he came from, is like a very believable person that I think we've all met and known.
Yeah. I mean, like he makes assumptions that like Pael's parents are like super strict. And it's like, oh my God, like I'm sure you had to lie to your parents about meeting me here for a study session. And she's like, actually, there's a lot of Indian American parents who are cool.
Yeah,
totally
but then
chill.
she was like, but I did have to lie to my parents.
But
like,
I did have to lie.
Right?
To be fair, mainstream like portrayals of Asian American families do nothing to disavow the fact that there are other types of Asian parents out there, right?
I mean, that was another goal of like having multiple Indian people in the book and multiple Asian people in the book, was to show that like there isn't just one way that these families exist, because there are like the cool moms and there are the like very, very strict moms, and then the in between, you know?
I will say the book opens essentially in media res at a crazy high school party. And I will say, I was never invited to those parties. So automatically, Pael's already way cooler than I was in high school.
I did have to wait until college to go to those parties. But I did go to one of those parties my very first weekend.
Oh, yeah. Day one
college.
for me. Yeah, for sure. Day one, went to one of those parties. Had a beer. Don't tell mom.
I heard about these parties in high school. Did not hang out with any of the people who threw these parties. But like what is it? Like I would watch like 2000 rom-coms, and there would be like red Solo Cup parties, and I'm like, that can't be real. Like, is that
I knew kids in high school who went to those parties, although I did have like my high school, like I did act out, like in terms of like definitely skipped school to go to the beach, like definitely snuck out of prom to go to like a club after prom and didn't tell my parents. So there was like a little, I like didn't drink or anything in high school, but there was like a little bit of that rebellion where I could do it.
I mean, I want to say you're about the same generation as us. So you probably grew up in the age of like 18 plus clubs, right? Like,
Yes.
Oh, that's right. That did exist.
Very much. Yes.
This is like super random, but since we were talking about like cool parents and like different Indian American parents, like is there a relationship that you related to among like the parent-child relationships in your book? Like, did you have a cool mom? Or
I think what I took from my relationship with my parents was the disconnect between the immigrant understanding of Americanism and the first gen understanding of Americanism. That is sort of the conversation she has with her mom about who gets to be American, or having, parents who substitute American for white, like it's the same thing in their heads, right? That was very much, I think, pulled from real life.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that conversation in the book. I'm not going to spoil it because that's like much later on in the book. But I was like, oh, like this is a conversation I would never have with my mom. So it was therapeutic. And I also just loved how like Pyle's grandpa immigrated to the U.S. but then like left after 8 months because he absolutely hated like America and its culture and its food. And then when his son and his wife decide to immigrate to America, he's like, I'm not going to talk to you for like a year. I thought that was like us. Like, I would love to read that story because that's something that I don't see often. Because usually our elders are like, I sacrificed so much for you. I am so strong. I have so much grit. Your new generation your young generation. You're weak. And it's like, love seeing an elder who couldn't hack it.
It was like, I'm not interested in this. That was sort of influenced because there's a book called The Making of Asian America by Erica Lee, which is one of my favorite books. And it is the literal history of Asian people in America. And it's cross Asia. So it's like a lot of stories. But something that struck me was the variety of story, because like you, I had a very like kind of strict idea of what immigration looked like for Indian people because it was all I knew. And part of that, of course, is the like 1965 and when people were allowed to come over. But there is a wide variety of immigration stories actually that don't get focused because the main narrative in fiction we often see is just like the singular experience. So I wanted to like shake it up a little bit and be like, it doesn't always look the same.
Yeah, it was definitely a fun detail that I enjoyed. Another thing that I really enjoyed about your book were the footnotes. You had like over 60 of them, I think.
Yep.
Where like was that always in like your original drafts? And did you have to prune some footnotes in the final draft?
Definitely had to prune some that when the note was like, this isn't funny, I was like, okay, fine. But they were very much a result of, like I said, like I want to take the joke when it's there, but I didn't want the joke to disrupt the flow of the story. And that's where footnotes came from. Yeah,
it definitely was in line with, Pyle's character, who is, like you mentioned, someone who always takes a joke. So there's always like an aside to an aside, sometimes multiple footnotes in one page. It was a lot of fun. I can imagine this is how she organizes thoughts in her head, too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've read, like, Babel by R.F. Kwong for our book club, and it's, like, going from, like, footnotes that are, like, very academic and giving you, like, historical background and context, and then just getting jokes.
Like the only time Pyle and Babel will ever be in the same conversation.
There's a lot of moments in the footnotes where she's like, oh, if you know, you know, like it's a Brown thing. Like if you get it, you get it.
I had to Google a lot in those, to be honest.
You don't translate any of the Hindi that's spoken in your book, and you don't use italics, which is kind of like we're phasing out of that with diaspora writers, but it challenges the reader to understand what's being said through context. And I want to hear your thoughts on why that was an important narrative choice for you. And did you get any feedback from your advanced readers on that?
No feedback on the advanced readers. I think we had conversations with my editors, very much so, because I think we all felt really strongly about this in terms of the translation. How many times have, we've read something or watched something and you do have to understand it through context clues. Even when it's all in English, there are words I don't know. I think about something like Train Spotting, which is written entirely in dialect. And you have to you get through it, right? And you enjoy the story, even if you don't pick up on every little facet of it. I wish desperately, if I had 3 wishes, one of them would be I can speak every language in the world, because when I watch something in another language, I'm furious that I know there are things that I'm not picking up on. And there are things that I will never pick up on, even with subtitles, because they're just nuances you won't understand if you are not a native speaker. But it doesn't
also, sometimes the subtitles don't translate the things.
Sometimes the subtitles don't translate well. But there are things but you still enjoy the thing that you are watching. One of the influences was actually very much New Girl. Cece Parekh on New Girl is one of my favorite Indian American representations, because I think they were so good about how they handled representation in that show with her. There are moments where she speaks Hindi and it is not translated. They don't do subtitles. You are just expected to understand as a viewer who doesn't speak Hindi what is happening based on the context of her acting and the scene. And so that is sort of how I handled my approach to it. For the italics, I agree that we don't need to italicize for all of the reasons that italics can foreignize something. I was a little concerned when I knew a word also had an English version of that, maine in Hindi is MAINE, which is also an English state, it's a state name. And so things like that made me a little nervous, because your brain is going to define the word as you know it. But it was so minor that I was no, I don't want italics.
Yeah, I really did love how confident sounded in that decision, because, so many times we read a lot of, books by diaspora authors, a lot of books about immigrants and children of immigrants. And there's a lot of different strategies they take in incorporating native languages. And a lot of times authors will find ways to slip in oh, you mean this? Ways to explain it. And, as someone who, also creates content for our community, it's so refreshing to see someone just refuse to use that explanatory comma, right? Refuse to explain it explicitly, because we should be savvy enough to understand the context. So I really, really did enjoy that.
Thank you.
Yeah. One of my favorite moments where I had to pick up on context clues with Hindi was when Philip comes over to Payal's house and her mom meets Philip for the first time. And then she says something in Hindi. And I was oh, I bet she just said, keep your door open.
Yeah.
And I was how did I know? If you're a if you lived in an immigrant household with parents who are a little bit concerned about opposite sexes, opposite genders.
I mean, when your daughter brings a hot Korean dude over, you gotta be concerned, right? Wearing a bomber jacket, probably has spiked hair,
It's who is this guy that I have never met and my daughter has barely mentioned? Okay, it's I love how I was able to pick up on that. And there are a lot of scenes like that in your book. So I'm sure your readers are going to enjoy, kind of guessing what the parents and the aunties are saying.
I hope so.
So we are winding down to the end of our interview. I guess that's a fun way to end this conversation. What are you reading or watching now?
I am currently listening to a book that is called, where's my Libby app? Oh, it's Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. It's a sequel to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. It's so good. It's by Heather Fawcett. It is like, if you like, on the YA side, if you like Holly Black and like stories about fairies and sort of like, again, a little bit of an not enemies, but like slightly cantankerous coworkers to lovers, perhaps. It's really fun. And I am watching an anime called Ice Guy and His Cool Female Colleague on Crunchyroll.
That's a workplace comedy, right? Like
it's a workplace, like kind of slice of life romantic comedy about this guy who is like descended from a snow goddess. And so whenever he gets overexcited, like blizzards erupt and like the girl he likes at work. And it's really cute.
That's awesome. And, I know you're busy with the book launch and everything, but are you working on anything else right now? I
have currently ongoing a Marvel comic series on the Marvel Unlimited app called House of Harkness, which is sort of like a magical girls like boarding school AU about Scarlet Witch and Agatha Harkness, which is really fun. And then working on like a bunch of book projects that I can't talk about yet, but I really want to because they're really fun.
I mean, Magical Girl, Marvel, you're just working on cool stuff. That's all you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us on the podcast, Preeti.
Thank you. This was so fun. It's really weird that people are reading the book, but it's exciting.
Congratulations. And that was Preeti Chhibber. Her debut novel, Pyle Mehta's Romance Revenge Plot, is available now at bookstores everywhere, including, as always, the Books and Boba bookshop. So you can pick it up right now if you head to booksandboba.com and click on our bookshop link. As always, any purchase on our online bookstore support not only us at Books and Boba, but also your local bookstores. Just a quick, I feel like I need to slip this in, but tomorrow, Saturday, September 28th, is our 8th anniversary. So Rira, congratulations on making it to 8 years of Books and Boba.
Congratulations to you. Yeah, you are the reason why I have stuck with this for so long, because I am the least consistent person you will ever meet.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of fun. I've been really enjoying, this podcast and book club has never felt like work to me. It's been really cool just to be able to read again. So thank you for indulging me in taking advantage of your moment of anger to turn it into probably the longest project I've been involved in a very long time. So
yeah. I mean, I'm angry all the time, so really, I use my anger all the time. Always have to channel it into something positive,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
A quick reminder that our September 2024 book club pick is A Burning by Megha Majumdar, which we will be discussing on next week's episode. So if you haven't finished the book yet, this is the weekend to do it and to get your thoughts in on either Discord or Goodreads. As always, we'd love to include your thoughts about this. What turned out to be a pretty heavy read in our discussion episode.
Listen, it can't always be good vibes every single time when we read. That's the beauty of this book club, One day we're reading fantasy, the next day we're reading social commentary on corruption and inequality.
Say what you will, it is a timely read, and I'm glad we will be discussing this at length. So yeah, stay tuned for our discussion on A Burning next week. But until then, thank you so much for listening to Books and Boba. Thank you once again to Preeti Chhibber for joining us, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rira Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey, I'm Phil Yu, and you may know me from a blog called Angry Asian Man.
And I'm Jeff Yang, author, journalist, and celebrity dad.
We host a podcast called They Call Us Bruce, an unfiltered conversation about what's happening in Asian America.
Each week or so, we host a discussion about some of the most vital and interesting topics in our pop culture and our community, bringing in guests who are shaping and informing this thing called Asian America from Hollywood to D.C. and beyond.
We got media, entertainment, food, family, politics, representation.
The good, the bad, the WTF of it all.
So check us out wherever you get your podcasts or at theycallusbruce.com.
Peace.
Peace.